There's this famous quote about Thomas Edison that everyone knows. Something about how he didn't fail 1,000 times inventing the light bulb, he just found 1,000 ways that didn't work. It's inspirational, gets printed on motivational posters, shared on social media by entrepreneurs and life coaches. But like most famous quotes, it smooths over the reality. Makes everything sound cleaner than it was. Because the truth about Edison isn't just a story about persistence. It's about ambition that bordered on obsession, ruthlessness that destroyed competitors, and a willingness to do whatever it took to win. He changed the world, absolutely. But he wasn't a saint doing it. He was born in 1847 in Milan, Ohio, the youngest of 7 kids. His father was a political activist who'd had to flee Canada after a failed rebellion, his mother a former schoolteacher. The family moved to Michigan when Edison was young, and that's where things got complicated. He was a curious kid, constantly asking questions, taking things apart, trying to figure out how stuff worked. But he struggled in school. His teacher thought he was difficult, maybe even slow. After 3 months, his mother pulled him out and homeschooled him herself. That decision probably changed history because it let Edison learn the way his brain actually worked, following his curiosity instead of a curriculum. He was always experimenting, even as a kid. Set up a laboratory in his parents' basement with chemicals and equipment he'd bought or scrounged. At 12, he got a job selling newspapers on trains, and he was good at it, entrepreneurial even then. He'd buy produce at one stop and sell it at another for a markup. He set up a printing press in a baggage car and published his own newspaper. And he kept experimenting until one day he caused a fire in that baggage car with his chemicals and got kicked off the train. That could have been the end of it, just another kid who liked science but didn't have a path forward. Except something else happened. He saved a child from being hit by a train, the son of a station agent. The grateful father offered to teach Edison telegraphy as a reward. That skill changed everything. Telegraphy was the cutting-edge technology of the time, the internet of the 1860s. Edison became a telegraph operator, and he was excellent at it. But he couldn't leave well enough alone. He started modifying the equipment, trying to make it better, faster, more efficient. He'd work his job during the day and tinker at night, barely sleeping, obsessed with improvement. His employers didn't always appreciate it. He got fired more than once for prioritizing his experiments over his actual work. By his early 20s, Edison had moved to Boston and then New York, working as a telegrapher but spending every spare moment inventing. He was living rough, barely eating, sleeping in basements and offices, pouring everything into his ideas. In 1869, he improved a stock ticker device and sold it to a company for $40,000. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having, and it gave him what he needed most: freedom to invent full-time. He set up a laboratory in Newark, New Jersey, and started cranking out inventions. He wasn't working alone anymore either. He hired machinists, skilled workers who could build the things he imagined. This is important because the myth of Edison is often that he was a lone genius in a lab, but that's not accurate. He was brilliant, sure, but he was also a manager, an orchestrator. He knew how to organize teams, how to delegate, how to push people to execute his vision. Some of his best ideas came from collaboration, from problems his team identified or solutions they suggested. But Edison always took the credit, always put his name on the patents. In 1876, he built a new laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. This wasn't just a workshop, it was an invention factory. He wanted to create a minor invention every 10 days and a major one every 6 months. That was the goal, that was the pace. And for a while, he nearly achieved it. The phonograph came out of Menlo Park in 1877, a device that could record and play back sound. People were stunned. It seemed like magic. Newspapers called him the Wizard of Menlo Park, and the nickname stuck. He was 30 years old and already famous. But the phonograph wasn't what made him immortal. That was the light bulb, or more specifically, the entire system of electric lighting that made the light bulb practical. And this is where the story gets complicated, because Edison didn't invent the light bulb. Electric lights already existed. Other inventors had created versions that worked, at least briefly. The problem was that they burned out too quickly or required too much power or were too expensive to manufacture. What Edison did was figure out how to make them last, how to make them affordable, and how to build the infrastructure to power them. That's what the 1,000 failures were about. He and his team tested material after material for the filament inside the bulb, trying to find something that would glow brightly without burning up immediately. They tried platinum, they tried different metals, different configurations. Nothing worked long enough. Then they started testing carbonized materials. Bamboo, thread, paper, cardboard, even hair. They methodically went through possibility after possibility, documenting each failure, learning from it, adjusting. It was tedious, exhausting work. Most people would have given up. Edison didn't. Not because he was more patient than other people, but because he was more stubborn. He believed he could solve it, and he wasn't going to let reality tell him otherwise. In 1879, after months of testing, they found a carbonized bamboo filament that lasted over 1,000 hours. That was the breakthrough. He immediately started filing patents, building prototypes, preparing to commercialize it. But having a working light bulb wasn't enough. Edison understood something crucial that a lot of inventors didn't. The invention was only valuable if people could actually use it. And for people to use electric lights, they needed electricity delivered to their homes and businesses. That meant power stations, wiring systems, meters, sockets, switches, the whole infrastructure. So Edison set about building that too. He wasn't just an inventor anymore, he was creating an entire industry. He established the Edison Electric Light Company, raised enormous amounts of capital, and started installing electrical systems. The first was in Lower Manhattan, the Pearl Street Station, which went live in 1882. It powered lights in homes and offices in a small section of the city, and it worked. People who'd been using gas lamps or candles suddenly had clean, bright electric light at the flick of a switch. It was revolutionary, and Edison made sure everyone knew he was the one who'd done it. That's when things got ugly. Because Edison wasn't the only person working on electrical systems. There was competition, particularly from a guy named George Westinghouse, who was promoting a different type of electrical current called alternating current, or AC. Edison's system used direct current, DC. The technical difference is complicated, but basically AC could transmit electricity over longer distances more efficiently. Edison's DC system required power stations every mile or so. Westinghouse's AC system could cover much larger areas. Edison saw this as a threat, and instead of acknowledging that AC might be superior for certain applications, he went to war. He launched a propaganda campaign to convince the public that AC was dangerous, that it would kill people. He wasn't entirely wrong. Electricity is dangerous, but he was exaggerating wildly. He staged public demonstrations where animals were electrocuted using AC current to show how deadly it was. He even pushed for the development of the electric chair, which used AC, specifically to associate that current with death. It was brutal, cynical, and it didn't work. AC was simply better for large-scale power distribution, and eventually it won out. This period, known as the War of Currents, showed a different side of Edison. He wasn't just a brilliant inventor. He was a ruthless businessman willing to destroy his competition through any means necessary. He spread misinformation, used his fame to influence public opinion, and tried to legislate his competitors out of existence. He lost anyway. By the early 1900s, AC had become the standard. Edison's reputation took a hit, though not enough to diminish his legend significantly. There's another uncomfortable truth about Edison that doesn't fit the inspirational narrative. He was terrible to the people who worked for him, or at least to some of them. Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest inventors in history, worked for Edison early in his career. Tesla improved some of Edison's designs, supposedly with a promise of a significant bonus. When Tesla completed the work, Edison allegedly dismissed it as a joke, told him he didn't understand American humor, and refused to pay. Tesla quit and became a competitor, eventually working with Westinghouse on AC systems. Edison had a genius working for him and drove him away through cheapness and disrespect. Edison also had a habit of taking credit for work done by his employees. His laboratories were collaborative environments, and many of the inventions that came out of them were team efforts. But Edison's name went on the patents. He held over 1,000 patents by the end of his life, but how many of those were truly his ideas versus refinements or inventions by his staff? It's hard to say. He paid his workers, sometimes well, but he also exploited them, kept the glory and most of the profits for himself. His personal life was complicated too. His first wife, Mary Stilwell, died young, possibly from a brain tumor, though some historians think morphine addiction might have played a role. Edison was so consumed with work that he was often absent, physically and emotionally. After Mary died, he remarried quickly to a much younger woman named Mina Miller. That marriage was more stable, but Edison remained obsessed with his work, spending endless hours in his laboratories, driven by something that went beyond passion into compulsion. He kept inventing into his later years, though nothing matched the impact of his early work. He developed motion picture technology, worked on storage batteries, experimented with concrete houses and synthetic rubber. Some projects succeeded, some failed, but he never stopped. Wasn't just in inventing things, it was in understanding how to make inventions matter. Plenty of people had good ideas in the 19th century. What separated Edison was his ability to take an idea and turn it into something practical, manufacturable, profitable. He thought like an engineer and a businessman simultaneously. He knew that an invention sitting in a laboratory was worthless. It had to get into people's hands, had to solve a real problem, had to be something they'd pay for. That's why he built systems, not just devices. The phonograph wasn't just a machine, it was the beginning of recorded music as an industry. The light bulb wasn't just a glass bulb with a filament, it was the foundation of the modern electrical grid. He thought bigger than most inventors, and he had the drive to see those big visions through, even when it took years and consumed everything he had. But that drive came with costs. He burned through relationships, pushed employees to exhaustion, engaged in unethical business practices, and spread misinformation when it suited him. He was so focused on winning that he sometimes lost sight of fairness or truth. The war of currents wasn't about what was best for society, it was about Edison protecting his investment and his ego. And he was willing to kill elephants and dogs in public to do it. There's also the question of what he didn't do. For all his innovations, Edison was conservative in some ways. He dismissed things that didn't fit his worldview or that threatened his existing businesses. He was slow to see the potential of AC current because it competed with his DC system. He underestimated radio because he was invested in his phonograph. He had blind spots, areas where his ego or his existing commitments kept him from seeing what was coming next. And yet, we remember him as a genius, because he was, despite everything else. His ability to focus on a problem, to test relentlessly, to learn from failure and keep going, that was extraordinary. The 1,000 failures with the light bulb filament weren't a waste, they were the process. Each one eliminated a possibility, narrowed the field, got him closer to the answer. That's not poetic, it's just how problem-solving works when you're doing something no one's done before. But most people don't have the endurance for it. They try a few things, get discouraged, give up. Edison didn't give up. Couldn't, maybe. His work ethic was legendary and probably unhealthy. He claimed he only needed a few hours of sleep, that he could power through exhaustion with willpower. He took naps on workbenches, slept in his clothes, went days without going home. He expected his employees to do the same, created a culture where overwork was celebrated and boundaries were for the weak. In today's language, we'd call that toxic. But it got results. The inventions poured out of Menlo Park and his later labs at a pace that's hard to fathom. There's something almost tragic about Edison, though, underneath all the success. He spent his entire life chasing the next invention, the next breakthrough, the next achievement. And he got them more than almost anyone in history. But did he ever stop and just exist? Did he ever feel satisfied? Or was there always another problem to solve, another competitor to crush, another way he was falling short? His letters and interviews suggest a man who was never quite content, always looking forward, always dissatisfied with where he was. Maybe that's what it takes. Maybe you can't change the world without that kind of relentless discontent, that refusal to accept things as they are. Comfortable people don't usually revolutionize industries. It's the ones who are driven by something they can't name, something that won't let them rest, who end up reshaping reality. But it's worth asking what they sacrifice to do it and whether the trade is worth it. Edison sacrificed relationships, health, peace of mind. He gained immortality, wealth, the satisfaction of seeing his inventions transform the world. Was it worth it? Depends on who you ask. For the rest of us, who benefit from electric lights and recorded sound and motion pictures, it was absolutely worth it. For him, for the people close to him, the answer's less clear. What's interesting is how the story of Edison has been sanitized over time. We teach kids about his perseverance, about how he failed 1,000 times and kept going. We make him into a hero of persistence, a model of the American dream. And there's truth in that. But we leave out the ruthlessness, the exploitation, the misinformation campaigns. We leave out Tesla and the other people he stepped on or stole from. We create a myth that's cleaner than the man. The real Edison was brilliant and cruel, visionary and petty, inspiring and exhausting. He was someone who could change the world and couldn't maintain a decent relationship with his own family. He could solve problems that stumped everyone else and couldn't see when he was wrong. He was, in other words, deeply human, contradictory and flawed and extraordinary all at once. That's what makes his story compelling, actually. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. Because the real one tells us that genius doesn't make you a good person, that success doesn't require perfection, and that the people who change history are usually complicated as hell. It tells us that you can be right about some things and completely wrong about others, that you can do great work and terrible things in the same lifetime. Edison died convinced he'd secured his legacy, and he was right about that. We're still using his inventions, still building on his ideas. Electric power, recorded sound, motion pictures, these are fundamental technologies that shaped the modern world. He didn't do it alone, didn't invent everything from scratch, but he made it real. He turned possibilities into products, ideas into industries. And those 1,000 failures, they weren't inspirational quotes waiting to happen. They were long nights in a laboratory, trying things that didn't work, dealing with the frustration and the waste and the pressure from investors who wanted results. They were tedious, unglamorous, often boring work that required someone stubborn enough to keep going when any reasonable person would have quit. Edison was that stubborn. Sometimes to his credit, sometimes to his detriment, always to an extreme. So when you flip on a light switch or listen to music or watch a movie, you're experiencing the results of that stubbornness. You're living in a world that Edison helped build through sheer force of will and relentless experimentation. But you're also living in a world where he crushed competitors, exploited workers, and spread lies to protect his interests. Both things are true, both matter. The man who failed 1,000 times succeeded in changing everything. But he wasn't a hero in the simple sense. He was something more complicated and more human than that. He was someone who wanted to win so badly that nothing else mattered, and who